Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and we have to talk about Shadow Hydreigon. Shadow Hydreigon just shocked everyone and won the Prague Regional Championships. Tauntaun Battus paired up Shadow Hydreigon with Aegislash and ran it all the way to a regional title. Today, I'm going to be using that same core in Go Battle League, and as it turns out, that core is still incredible in Go Battle League. I ran Shadow Hydreigon, Togekiss, and Aegislash, and ended up having very positive sets, as I was able to climb up to 3180 ELO, which at the time of recording should be top 50 in the world. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and in game number 1, we pick up a very strong lead, Shadow Hydreigon into Shadow Empoleon. Empoleon's Shadow status is a negative for it in this matchup, as with the Dragon Breaths, they're probably already in range where Brutal Swing can pick up the knockout. I fire off the Brutal Swing, that gets the shield. Hydreigon does outpace Empoleon, and they overfarm too much. The 9-turn pacing of Hydreigon is relentless. We force both shields from my opponent, and at this point, I'm already counting this game as a win, because backing up the Shadow Hydreigon is Aegislash, and there's no Pokemon in the game that loves seeing an opponent without shields more than Aegislash. The incredible synergy between Shadow Hydreigon and Aegislash is why this team works. It's very difficult to no-shield moves from Shadow Hydreigon, it just does way too much damage. But if you end up giving up all your shields to Hydreigon, then you just get swept by Aegislash in the back. My opponent saves the Empoleon, they catch onto Altaria, but Blade Form Aegislash is about to inflict devastating damage. Shadow Ball lands, I can stay in with the Blade Form Aegislash, the Dragon Breath add up, but I can bank a Shadow Ball for later, and then send in Togekiss. I do want to go for a shield because I'm going to have to shield something in this game. So I put up the shield, I'm going to get a full peck farm down, and now my opponent can't ever bring in the Empoleon. The Empoleon doesn't have a move. So instead they're forced to reveal their final Pokemon is a Shadow Quagsire, and this game is over. Aura Sphere lands, devastating damage. They can go for an Aqua Tail, but Aqua Tail just simply is not going to cut it. I can now farm up to the back-to-back Aura Spheres. There's the switch into Empoleon. Empoleon won off the Hydro Cannon. They have it now, but I can shield up, click Aura Sphere, and it turns out we don't even need our Shadow Ball on the Aegislash. Togekiss is going to be able to close out this game. Back in comes the Quagsire, we make the Aura Sphere, and Aegislash did put in some very nice work, but this backline was set up brilliantly by Shadow Hydreigon getting all shields down. We move to game number 2, picking up a very strong lead, Shadow Hydreigon into Shadow Quagsire. My opponent safe switches into a Togekiss, and I don't think they're going to like what comes next. I bank a fly on Hydreigon, send in the Aegislash, and they are just completely walled. This is the worst meta matchup for Togekiss. They can fire off Aura Sphere after Aura Sphere, and Aegislash will just simply never care. These Aura Spheres do not do any kind of meaningful damage onto the Aegislash, and Aegislash can farm up to the back-to-back moves. Here, I did go for the Shadow Ball to cover for a potential catch, but my opponent's just going to stay on the field. The good news for me is that Aegislash and Blade Form is so much attack that even a neutral Shadow Ball will be enough to KO the Togekiss, so it covers my bases. I fire off Shadow Ball, that takes the knockout, in comes Quagsire, and it's instantly answered with Shadow Ball number 2. This Shadow Ball is going to connect, I send in Togekiss, and it's a simultaneous switch, Togekiss into Tinkaton. This is a pretty good matchup for Togekiss in the 2-shield. I do still have an entire fly's worth of energy on the Hydreigon, and this Tinkaton is taking quite a lot of damage. They're already below half HP. Tinkaton will go for the Bulldoze bait. They do get the debuff as well, but it feels like even with the Bulldoze debuff, it's just simply too little too late. They are so far behind. The Aegislash just absolutely ran roughshod over this entire team. I will put up the shield as they finally full send the Gigaton Hammer, wait a turn, and ensure that the Aura Sphere will land on its intended target. That will get the shield. I'm going to farm up, go for a switch into Hydreigon. I don't get the catch, but I had the Fly loaded. Fly is resisted, but look at the damage on Hydreigon. We knock out Tinkaton with a resisted Fly, and that's a good game. We get a great lead in the next match, Shadow Hydreigon into Shadow Drifblim. My opponent safe switches into Blastoise. I'm going to bank a fly and then just send in Aegislash. Aegislash is going to have a very dominant matchup here because Blastoise has no fast move pressure and Hydro Cannon just really does not hit very hard. So I can just continue to farm up a massive amount of energy. My opponent does end up throwing on alignment, so I do get a charging for free. Now Aegislash, I've mentioned this in previous videos, but it only uses Psycho Cut when it's in the Blade form. When it's in the shield form, it uses a modified version of Psycho Cut called Charging, which only generates 6 energy per charging instead of the 9 from Psycho Cut. Shadow Ball is going to be shielded, and for some reason, I lose charge attack priority to Blastoise while in Blade form. So there are definitely some bugs with Aegislash because that should never happen. I should always win charge attack priority there, and then I was just going to let it go. But unfortunately, there was a game error where I ended up losing charge attack priority, despite the fact that I ended up winning that charge attack priority by a massive, massive margin. And now I decide that I'm just going to let the Aegislash go. Aegislash has done its job, and now I can send in Hydreigon and knock out the Blastoise with a Fly. Fly will connect, down goes Blastoise, in the back is Azumarill, and this game is over. It might seem like my opponent has the upper hand here, but I have a guaranteed path to victory, and that is throwing the Fly, banking a Brutal Swing, and then going for a catch onto Togekiss. This is going to bait back out my opponent's Drifblim, and they're going to get a pretty massive farm down. However, that farm down doesn't matter because they lose charge attack priority to the Shadow Hydreigon, and I made sure to bank the Brutal Swing before switching out. So my opponent is going to exit with an Icy Wind loaded just to have that energy go nowhere because Hydreigon wins charge attack priority. Since they didn't have any shields, banking that move guaranteed the win because now I have a Shadow Hydreigon and I still have my shield intact. So I can farm up with Hydreigon, go for the Fly, and Azumarill is going to get knocked out by a Dark Dragon type as we get another win. We move to the next game, Shadow Hydreigon into Togekiss. This is not an amazing matchup. However, Hydreigon does have a decent amount of play here. I can threaten massive damage with Fly, and I can also potentially look to try and go for an Aura Sphere catch onto Togekiss. I farm up. I was going to do 3 and go for the catch, but my opponent ends up throwing after 1. Aura Sphere will be shielded up. I'm just going to try and make it to the Fly. I do make it to the Fly, and I decide to double down and go for a double bait. The double bait pays off. I get both shields. They undertap the Aura Sphere, and now I have all shields down, which is all Aegislash could ever want. So I can send in Aegislash and get to work farming up to 100 energy. My opponent sends in Empoleon. Empoleon never throws energy, and I know that Shadow Ball just cleanly knocks them out, so all this energy is just going to go down the drain. I will have to switch it to Blade form where I'm going to be more vulnerable, but Shadow Ball will take the one-hit knockout, and Empoleon is gone. To add insult to injury, we're catching an Aura Sphere onto our Togekiss as well, where it's double resisted. We're now back into the shield form on Aegislash because we pivoted out. Psyshock really not going to do much, and I can look to farm up. I don't know what my opponent had in the back, but clearly they did not want to deal with a Togekiss Aegislash core, as they will resign the match. Great lead in the next match, leading Hydreigon into Stunfisk. My opponent save switches into a Bug Bite Fortress, and I will respond with Togekiss. Arguably, maybe sending in Aegislash would have been a little bit better, but I'm very used to sending in the Togekiss and just going for the one-shield farm down. As long as you switch in fast enough, you should be able to shield up the Rock Tomb and then peck down before they make another one. My opponent fires off a last-second charge attack, but I have to trust in my counts. I know shield, it's a Sand Tomb, and that is a big swing of momentum. Had I shielded a Sand Tomb and gone down 2 shields, then I could have been in a lot of trouble. But now my Togekiss gets to unleash Aura Sphere after Aura Sphere onto the Stunfisk. Unfortunately, these are debuffed Aura Spheres, but they will still add up just because I have so many of them. And my Togekiss, it's the rank 42, it hangs on 1 HP to make one final Aura Sphere. Aura Sphere is going to land. In comes Hydreigon. I know I survived the Mud Bomb, and I'm expecting my opponent's going to try and snipe with whatever they have in the back. So I switch into Aegislash. It's a simultaneous switch. Aegislash into Wigglytuff. And suddenly, I'm very, very happy that I saved the Aegislash for their final Pokemon. Aegislash just has such a commanding matchup. They go for the Icy Wind, and I immediately return fire with the Gyro Ball. I want to get into Sword form as fast as possible because that way I can take advantage of the faster energy generation from Psycho Cut. I do take a lot more damage from the charms, but look at Aegislash go. This pacing is absolutely nightmare fuel. I fire off another Gyro Ball, I get the shield, they're trying for a farm down, and I even over-farm to throw on good timing. That's how fast Aegislash Blade form is. We take the one-hit KO, back in comes the Stunfisk, and I'm just going to stay in to take the Psycho Cuts. Now I can bring in Hydreigon, we make it to the Brutal Swing on very low HP, and we're able to take the win. That game, Hydreigon unfortunately didn't get to do much, but Aegislash was the star. Man, we saw a lot of Stunfisk leads today, as we're going to lead into yet another one. Hydreigon should be able to live a Mud Bomb, but ideally I would love nothing more than to not take a Mud Bomb, so if I can potentially just land Brutal Swings, shield up the Mud Bomb, and basically have a full HP Hydreigon, I think that would end up working out a lot better. They fire off the Mud Bomb, I can look to overfarm, go for the Brutal Swing, and now they have to decide, are they really willing to match shields? They say yes, but this does look like prime farm down range for the Hydreigon. My opponent should not be able to make a third Mud Bomb. Mud Bomb is going to be shielded. There's the pivot into Altaria, and I have an okay response available as I send in Togekiss. Now, if my counts are right, I should be able to farm up 1 past the second Psyshock and take the knockout there. So that way I can have a little bit of residual energy for when my opponent sends back in the Stunfisk. Sky Attack is going to land. I farm up, go for the Psyshock, but my counts were off by 1. I was off by 1 Dragon Breath. They outpace, take the knockout, and suddenly the path is not so clear. I send in Aegislash, they bank some energy, they're going to be sending in Stunfisk, and Stunfisk will fire off a move. But the good news for me is Stunfisk didn't double up, so I should be able to pivot into Hydreigon and snipe them down with Dragon Breaths. I have a ton of energy. If they bring in the Altaria, I can immediately threaten a knockout with a Brutal Swing. They're waiting down their timer. In the back, they have Feraligatr, and Feraligatr is about to get deleted. I have back-to-back flies loaded on Hydreigon. Hydreigon will win Charge Attack priority. My opponent doesn't end up going for the Charge Attack priority tie there, but this is going to hurt. Fly lands, Feraligatr barely survives, in comes Altaria, and Altaria is able to get that farm down. However, I just now get to send in Aegislash and farm up to the back-to-back Shadow Balls. Because unless we have a big game error like when Aegislash somehow lost Charge Attack priority to a Blastoise earlier when it was in Blade form, this game is over. Because Feraligatr, it is a pretty solid attack stat, but it's nowhere close to Aegislash Blade form. In comes Feraligatr. Game thankfully works as intended. This Shadow Ball will be massive overkill onto Feraligatr, and that's a good game. We move to the next match, picking up a terrible lead, Shadow Hydreigon into Tinkaton. I save switch into Togekiss, but unfortunately this is a weak spot for this team. A lot of teams with Shadow Hydreigon and Aegislash will usually have a Feraligatr in the middle. I wanted to try and run something a little bit harder to use than Feraligatr, so I did put in Togekiss, but unfortunately that does mean that I am quite a bit weaker to Tinkaton. My opponent Bulldoze baits, they do get the shield, but importantly they don't get the debuff. Them sending an Altaria means they are very, very weak to Togekiss in the back. They're going to fire off a Sky Attack, but they can never Dragon Breath me down even after the Sky Attack connects. Whereas I can apply a lot of pressure onto the Altaria because these Pecks are really adding up. Psyshock won't quite take the knockout, but it will get them pretty low. I'm able to make another Psyshock, so I was at the very least able to get my shield back. Psyshock is going to connect. I have to decide, am I willing to play for switch advantage here? Am I going to go down both shields? I say no. I'm just going to go for a monster farm down with Aegislash. Aegislash can't quite get the charging down on Altaria. Altaria able to hang on and make the flamethrower. That is quite a lot of damage taken. And now, in the back, they are revealed to have Feraligatr. Unfortunately, this seems like a game that I am not going to be able to win. Feraligatr fires off Hydro Cannon. That is going to put the Aegislash pretty low. I fire off the Shadow Ball, but unfortunately, I don't think Shadow Ball quite takes the one-hit KO here. It is going to be close. I go for the Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball into Feraligatr is going to land. There's the pivot, and in comes Tinkaton. I stay in to fire off Shadow Ball, calling that my opponent would blind switch, but now I need Hydreigon to knock out Tinkaton. I was able to knock them out with a fly when they were a little bit lower than this, but it's going to be very, very close. I call the Bulldoze. They don't get the debuff. I desperately need this fly to secure the knockout. Come on, Shadow Hydreigon. Fly lands. Tinkaton survives and gets the farm down. I send in the Aegislash. We can't charging down. And despite a terrible lead, we make it so close, but the game will end in a loss. We pick up a great lead in the next match, Shadow Hydreigon into Malamar. As long as Malamar cannot land a charge attack in this matchup, they cannot inflict any kind of meaningful damage. They go for a foul play. Even a foul play bait would do way too much damage to Hydreigon, and I return fire with a Brutal Swing. They put up the shield, I overfarm, CMP tied to their next charge attack, and now they have to decide, is this going to KO? Brutal Swing lands, down goes Malamar, and that is a big swing of momentum. I basically still have 2/3 of a Hydreigon, so I'm in a very good spot. I overfarm, fire off the Brutal Swing, Stunfisk overfarms, they play to a CMP tie that they do not win, and Shadow Hydreigon is taking over. Brutal Swing knocks out a second Pokemon, in the back is Fearow, and Hydreigon is still not done. This Pokemon is crazy. We make it to a third Brutal Swing, forcing both shields, taking 2 knockouts. Opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. Hopping into the final match, leading Shadow Hydreigon into Voltwitch Fortress. This should be a pretty nice matchup for Hydreigon. I'm very happy this is the regular Fortress because the Shadow is usually on Bug Bite, and that would not be good for Shadow Hydreigon. I put up the shield respecting the Rock Tomb, but my opponent ends up going for the Sand Tomb. That is a little bit unfortunate, as Sand Tomb is going to lower what's already a pretty low defense stat for Hydreigon. I'm able to get the shield, my opponent gonna fire off a charge stack, and I will respect the Rock Tomb here. Sand Tomb would barely miss the knockout, Rock Tomb will be shielded, and in comes Malamar. I bank a ton of energy, go for the catch and sneak, and I get it onto the Togekiss. This is very, very good. I saved so much energy on that Shadow Hydreigon, and it appears from my opponent sending a Malamar into a loaded Hydreigon, they don't have anything for Hydreigon. Aura Sphere will connect, taking the knockout. Are they going to be bringing back in the Fortress? Yes, they will. I fire off the Aura Sphere as soon as I get it. I don't care that this move is thrown on alignment. I just need to guarantee the final shield because Hydreigon is going to be winning charge attack priority. In comes Hydreigon. They go for a catch onto Meowscarada. And unfortunately for this poor trainer, they just had nothing for Hydreigon. Meowscarada not going to get a farm down. I'm able to make another brutal swing, and Shadow Hydreigon is just relentless. We take the knockout. We get the catch, sending in Aegislash. And this is a zero shield scenario with an Aegislash. You're never beating it. Opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. This was one of the most fun teams I have played all week. Every time I feature Aegislash, and I feature Aegislash a lot, I harp on the fact that this is a difficult Pokemon to use. It's a Pokemon that has a pretty brutal learning curve, but as you play it more, as you get more comfortable with it, you start to realize this Pokemon is disgustingly strong. To me, it's basically the strongest Pokemon that you could use right now, and it's paired with Togekiss, another Pokemon that has insane matchups in this current meta. Add to that the Shadow Hydreigon, which is so strong at pressuring shields away from opponents, and you end up having a trio core that can handle just about anything thrown its way. Across the sets that I played with the team, I believe I went all positive. So I was able to climb up to 3180, and that's when queue time started getting pretty bad. Now, between the time that I recorded the intro and now, the leaderboard's actually updated, so I can confirm that I'm 28th in the world with Shadow Hydreigon and Aegislash. Big shout out to Tauntaun Battus. He was able to win a regional championship with this core. I will make a HomeSliceHenry video that actually probably goes live before this video does, covering his run. So if you want to see the Shadow Hydreigon Aegislash core piloted in a Show 6-Pick-3 format, the channel is called HomeSliceHenry. I don't normally advertise the second channel a lot on the main channel, but hey, it does exist, and I'm pretty proud of the content that I'm making over there. But for the time being, man, this meta is evolving in some pretty cool and interesting ways. Who would have thought that, of all things, Tinkaton being added to a meta somehow made Shadow Hydreigon very strong, because Shadow Hydreigon is really good into a lot of the things that people pair with Tinkaton, and the many anti-Tinkaton Pokemon as well, like the Quagsires, the Unova Stunfisks of the world. This Shadow Hydreigon plus Aegislash core also follows the same basic outline that I detailed in my first Aegislash video of the season, but I mentioned that I felt like the player base, and me specifically, were beginning to solve Aegislash. And that is the fact that Aegislash has to be paired with Pokemon that have insane shield pressure. You cannot pair Aegislash with two tanks. It will never work because you will never be able to get shields down. However, pairing it with a Pokemon like a Shadow Hydreigon, a Shadow Primeape, a Shadow Charizard, Pokemon that simply command a shield advantage, because if you don't end up shielding their moves, then you're going to lose basically your entire team because they hit that hard. Pairing Aegislash up with Pokemon like that is the key to success with this Pokemon. You need to try and force shields down, because once your opponent no longer has shields, then Aegislash is kind of destroying everything. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed watching it, please do help support the channel by leaving a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And an extra special thank you, as always, to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so appreciated, so thank you guys so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.